much rather have it be a road.
Oh, okay.
I think this is all presentations.
Okay.
For the first 30 minutes.
I'm just going to talk the whole time. Transition.
How many minutes?
Kind of unknown. You don't like why not?
You can go.
Mic is on. And speak into the microphone.
So when you,
I wake up and
you're right, this says
Okay. It's been on. It's on. Yeah,
branding
you're good.
accent is what it says. Branding.
Okay, hold on. Let me just get myself situated. Hold on.
Yeah, what does that mean?
yeah, I wake up in the middle of the night and I worry. Pardon? I don't know. Could be.
And this is the number 6. Is the primary ammonia. Well, again, that
Not
is
really.
great. I mean,
I have like a little
Kind
bit
of
of
a
a break
reflective
right
thing,
there. There you go.
Bulletproof
Hey,
glass.
why don't your mask on, Dennis?
oh, you do?
Yeah, just announce that.
I can't breathe.
When you're talking, you take it down.
Jack gets back, we're going to go.
Okay.
No, you can act like you didn't hear it, tell them you're old.
It's not that, it's my glasses came up. I have to put it on here.
No, I'm not.
I'm calling a joint meeting to order. Go ahead, Fred.
Good morning. Welcome to the second meeting of the review for the Sherwin-Williams HQ development proposal. In compliance with notification requirements of Ohio's open meeting law and section 101.021 of the codified ordinances of Cleveland, Ohio, 1976, notice of this meeting has been publicly posted. All boards and commissions under the purview of the City Planning Department conducts its meetings according to Robert's Rules of Order. Actions during the meeting will be taken by voice vote. Abstentions from any vote due to a conflict of interest should be stated for the record prior to the taking of any vote. All meeting activity is being recorded. These proceedings are also being live streamed via YouTube and TV20. All public comments have been received via the City of Cleveland Planning Commission website and email at cityplanning@clevelandohio.gov. Copies of all comments have been distributed to all members of the committees and commission prior to the meeting. The Sherwin-Williams website will also hold comments. The website is listed on the screen. Mr. Chairman, the meeting is yours.
Great. So this is going to be a schematic review of Sherwin-Williams' new headquarters. Everyone speaking, please, if you would raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, as you shall answer under the penalty of perjury? Okay. The floor is yours now.
Good afternoon. My name is Tim Muckley. I'm the Director of Corporate Real Estate for the Sherwin-Williams Company. With me today, I've got Julie Young, who's our Vice President of Communications. I've got Bill Chilton with Picard Chilton, Matt Heisey with Vocon, John Zegan with Osborne Engineering, and we've added 2 additional team members today. We've got Jarek Boss with OBJ Landscape Architects, and we have Tom Brown with Nelson Nygaard, which is our traffic consultant. So, at our last meeting on July 20th, we brought forward our conceptual design plans, and those were for our new global corporate headquarters. At that meeting, those plans were approved as presented with 8 conditions. As you may recall, at that meeting, I indicated that the success of this project depends on us developing a strong relationship with the city and building trust. As you'll also remember, I mentioned that that I acknowledge that there would be times in this process where the city's vision and our business needs may not be fully in alignment. When that happens, we committed to do 3 things, and that was to listen and understand the city's perspective and goals, to engage our resources to try to find a solution that satisfies the city's vision and also meets the business needs of Sherwin-Williams, and then also to be honest about what we can and can't do. At the end of this meeting, I hope you'll see that we've honored that commitment. Next slide. Oh, that's good. All right. So as you can see from the conditions, some of them are very straightforward, on their face. Others require some interpretation and understanding of the city's vision. With respect to condition 1, 5, and 6, we heard several themes, and those came from the design review boards, especially as it relates to our property being the connecting piece between the warehouse district and Public Square. The themes that we heard were provide a pleasant pedestrian experience along Frankfurt between Public Square and the warehouse district. Define how your retail strategy plays a role in activating the street level experience, and incorporate a garage facade that engages the public and furthers the pedestrian experience along Frankfurt and West 3rd. To better understand these themes, we engaged with the city planning department and also the community stakeholders. We started by having a mini design charrette with the city planning department, where they shared a lot of examples of garage facades and bridge designs that they felt met the city's vision. Next slide. Next, we hosted 2 days of community review and feedback sessions. These sessions were broken down into 4 groups of participants. We met with building managers and building owners, downtown residents, developers and building owners, and representatives from the travel and leisure industry. Next slide, Bill. In these meetings, we asked them questions about the pedestrian experience, about what makes this, what makes a positive street level experience, and what elements draw you to a specific walking path. We also asked them about retail and future development, about the viability of retail along Frankfurt and West 3rd, as well as what type of businesses would they see and want to have in the future development area along St. Clair and West 6th. We also asked them about garage facades and sky bridges, and whether those elements should be a distinct architectural element or whether those should be integrated to the overall look and feel of the project and the pavilion and tower. This feedback from the city and the community stakeholders was invaluable and really played a huge part in informing our schematic design that you'll see today. Here are some of the key takeaways that we had from those interactions. With respect to the pedestrian experience, we heard a good pedestrian experience has lighting, landscaping, is safe, and has something fun like public art. On the retail strategy, we heard retail along Frankfurt will not survive. Focus your retail efforts on West 3rd and the future development area on West 6th. With respect to the garage and sky bridges, we heard make it integrated as part of one campus and not the focal point of the project. With that feedback, we put our design, construction, and real estate teams to work. We engaged OJB, our landscape architect, to start working on enhancing the pedestrian experience and the landscaping around the 2 surface lots. We engaged Nelson Nygaard to perform a vehicular, pedestrian, and multimodal traffic study. We created a heat map of where all of our employees in Northeast Ohio live to better try to predict what those future traffic patterns will look like. We installed video cameras along both ends of Frankfurt and to get a better idea of what does that pedestrian and scooter, bicycle, and bus traffic look like today. We engaged CBRE, our real estate brokers, to conduct a retail survey of downtown to help better define our retail strategy. We investigated the logistics, security, and code implications of rooftop access to the pavilion. We conducted analysis of the buildings around Public Square to better understand the architectural datum and the building heights. Lastly, we spent countless hours refining our schematic designs and building elevations. At this point, I'll turn over the presentation to Matt and Bill. They'll walk you through our schematic designs, We will address all 8 of those conditions, throughout the presentation. To the extent that we don't fully touch on something, we'll circle back to that at the end of the presentation. Thank you.
So, reorienting everybody from what we showed at the conceptual level, as part of the condition of approval, we were asked to take a look at the overall pavilion height. And in doing so, we really started by looking at the context and the orientation of the pavilion to public square. And what we've done as we talk at the conceptual level approval is we've really started to address the pavilion in a respectful way to public square. We looked at the context that has been set up between Terminal Tower and 200 Public Square, how those buildings specifically are fronting on Public Square. But we attempted to have the pavilion do the same thing. We pulled the building slightly back off of the corner to address Public Square in a graceful way, also to create an entry forecourt at the front door of the headquarters. Reorienting everybody as well, the overall form of the tower, the garage, and the pavilion. You'll hear us talk about these 3 components in specific ways. So just a reorientation of those 3 pieces. Pavilion on the Jacobs site, the tower on the southwestern block, and the garage on the northwestern block. As we also discussed at the conceptual level, Sherwin-Williams has bought 7.2 acres of property. And the program that we have for the headquarters project doesn't fill 7.2 acres of property. So it's the vision of Sherwin-Williams to be the catalytic driver in the overall redevelopment of this entire neighborhood. At the initial build-out, in the future development, the vision is to have the pavilion, the office tower, and the parking structure. And as Tim just mentioned, future development on the corner of Sept and West 6th Street, and holding a portion of the property on the southwestern site at the corner of Superior and West 6th Street for future development. The initial build-out, though, as we discussed, is intended to, at this point in time, to be the parking structure, the pavilion, and the office tower. So one of our conditions of approval at the conceptual meeting was for Sherwin-Williams to go back and study the height specifically of the entry pavilion on Public Square. And in doing so, what we have found is there are 2 datums that exist in and around Public Square. Tim mentioned them a few seconds ago. There's a clear mid-rise datum that sets up around Public Square. It's framed by the tops of the buildings that frame Public Square. But there's also a very distinct pedestrian level datum that can be seen in almost every building surrounding Public Square. Key Tower and the Historic Bank Building have these 2 datums present, as you can see on the slide. There's not an absolute dimension of how high.
Your mic. They're having trouble hearing you in the next room with your mic. Is it on?
Hello? Check.
Check.
Is it working fine? Thank you. So as I mentioned, this mid-rise and pedestrian datum are apparent in almost every building around downtown. And while it's not an absolute datum, we've used these 2 datum points to set up the height of our 14th floor conference level in the office tower. You can see it in the model.
Yeah.
As well as the height of the pavilion itself. Understanding the pavilion is the pedestrian scaled element, is that front door, the gracious front door to the headquarters. We've set the height of the pavilion at 45 feet, which is a slight increase to what we had shown prior. It is still 2 stories, I want to be clear on that, but these 2 stories are 2 stretch stories. So that 45 to 50 feet in height does relate to the base level of the Renaissance Tower, the base level of Key Tower, and other buildings in and around Public Square. And then, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, this approximate 200-foot level sets up the conference level reveal that you see in the office tower. As far as the overall planning is concerned, here we go. Level 1 Of the pavilion and the tower are set up. Primary entry lobby, that will be for Sherwin-Williams employees and invited guests. We have a barista on Public Square, as well as our Learning and Development Center. The first floor of the office tower consists of the main employee lobby for employees coming from the south and west and from the north. Back of house space, but I also want to point out in our retail strategy, as Tim mentioned, we did get information from many folks, specifically CBRE, talking about the viability of retail. What we've done on the West Superior side of the building, the little orange line that you see there, that would be intended to be brand display, color display, some outward-facing communication of brand or the lineage of Sherwin-Williams. It's important to note that on day one, our intent is to provide that space, but the space has been set up that if retail does become viable in the future, the programmed areas that are behind that space could be converted to future retail at some point in time. The second floor of the tower and the pavilion, as we discussed in our conceptual meeting, the Learning and Development Pavilion exists, the Learning and Development Center exists on the second floor, connected down a hallway across the Sky Bridge and to our food service, which is on the second floor of the office tower. And then finally, the third floor of the pavilion, of the office tower, there's a little bit of a lag in this, just so you know, would be our fitness and wellness area. It's important to note that we were asked to look at rooftop access to the pavilion. As Tim mentioned, we did study that. There were challenges with that. It will be a non-occupied roof, but it is Sherwin-Williams' intent to make that a decorative ballasted roof. We understand the concerns with buildings looking down on Public Square specifically, onto the roof of the tower, and the intention is that this is not a white TPO glaring roof. It will be a decorative roof treatment. And then bringing this all together, hopefully. I don't know. There you go. So a final axonometric which shows all three pieces of the office tower coming together.
Okay. What we'd like to do is actually start out relative to the pavilion. The tower gets a lot of focus. Take this off. The tower gets a lot of focus for good reason on the skyline. The way that all of us in this room are really going to experience this project is at the ground level. And so we'd like to start out first walking through the pavilion. So what you're looking at, here's a view straight on here to the main entry, through what we're referring to as the corridor. Here.
One of the things that we've been looking at with Bill and with the team is this at human scale. So most people will experience the site either walking to the site, they'll be taking public transportation, or they'll be kind of at that vehicular level. And so getting walkability right, getting these street trees, and then having kind of key sight lines to each of the entries, we think is really important.
This view is from taken across Public Square, and you start to get a sense here a bit better in terms of the relationship of these three volumes to the color garden itself.
I think what we've done is we've developed some of these spaces so the pavilion pulls back a little bit. There's this great scale. You have Public Square with that open space. Then we have some open space at the pavilion, and then that starts to step up to that tower. And then along Superior, we've kind of got this great walking corridor. And when we get to kind of the end of the slideshow, I'll walk you around the site and just talk about some of these elements and how some of these gardens work and support the architecture as well as the city.
So this is a view from West Roadway. As we come around, you can see through here. This is to Frankfurt. We've carved a way at the corner here to actually open up this a bit more to Frankfurt. we have a lot of slides to go through here. So in the interest of time, we have very limited time. I'll be going through this very quickly. So this is a view of the model. So this is the view of the model that you're looking at here. Looking down on the entry pavilion, here you can see the Skyway connection to the parking garage. Whoops. This is a view of the entry pavilion where you can see the three sites really and the composition together. And then this is a view looking down West 3rd, here being the tower lobby entrance, this is being the visitor entrance that Matt was referring to in the entry pavilion. So the tower, let's talk about that. So as we looked at this, of course, the buildings like this are designed from the inside out. And so once we sort of worked out what was the ideal floor plate for Sherwin-Williams, we looked at this in sort of 4 basic steps. Here you can start to see the breaking up of this volume here into 4 quadrants. And it's really representing the relationship to Public Square, to Lake Erie, to Warehouse District, and to the Flats. And we've introduced here this reveal or slot that while we're not talking about exterior lighting in this presentation, we will in the next presentation. This is going to provide an opportunity for lighting as well as the tower top itself. We then started to look at the expression of those 4 quadrants and looking at it relative to different heights. And then started to sculpt the top. And the top is, the prominence of this peak right here is really in recognition to the relationship to Public Square. This secondary is more about the relationship to the Warehouse District. And then Matt talked about the datum that exists around here and in the 14th floor, and that really matching that datum point, as well as on the west side of the tower. So here are a series of renderings looking at the tower. This is a view from Superior. You see the entry pavilion on your right, the tower on the left, and the tower lobby entrance here off of Superior. This is a view from West 3rd, looking back through the entry pavilion. You know, one of the things to note about, in particular, the entry pavilion is this is a building that is at the street level, a very, very transparent building. And so you will see the uses that are going on inside of the building, including what is, the Center of Excellence, which is really telling the Sherwin-Williams story, but also learning and development. This is a view from Superior and West Prospect, and what you can see here is the entry pavilion and the relationship to the tower lobby. This is a view down Frankfurt, the Skyway connection to the parking garage. You can also start to see in a little bit more detail what's happening relative to the facade of the parking garage, specifically on West 3rd, where this is really matching the enclosure of the building and then the retail area here at ground level, which has a very distinct identity. This is a view from the Detroit Superior Bridge. And this skyline view, I think you're starting to see what this relationship is of the towers in downtown Cleveland. Oops. This is a photograph of the model that is on my right. And again, the relationship with, in particular, Key Tower and Terminal Tower, and the conversation that's starting to happen between those towers. Oops. Sorry, we've got a lag on the slides here. So, as you can see here, again, this is really trying to underscore what that relationship is between the towers. And this is, for all intents and purposes, an elevational view of the east facade. the west and north block. So to give you a bit of orientation here, the tower and podium is located here to the south. The Skyway connection, the parking garage, the flow of the garage is coming off of the vacated Frankfurt Street, and the exit is here on West 3rd. The parking garage itself is, fairly straightforward. We've got 4 levels above grade, and that is nominally at about 45 feet. This is a detail of the facade on West 3rd. This is just a placeholder here relative to the retail that would be along West 3rd. In fact, do you just want to comment relative to the retail, Tim?
Yeah, thank you, Bill. So I know that there's a question that asked about the height of this retail, and whether that is the right size for attracting retail tenants. And we're already working with a couple retail tenants that are very supportive of our business at Sherwin-Williams, that I think we could easily get into the space at the current height level. And that it would, and Matt, I don't know if you wanted to speak at all about what that actual height level is.
So yeah, in the height of the existing retail, the height of the proposed retail in this location is floor to floor is about 11'6". Clear height underneath that slab is about 11 feet. The retail spaces aren't large. We have about 2,600 square feet total of retail. So for smaller service-based tenant uses, we feel getting to a 9'6" ceiling height is appropriate and adequate in that retail space.
Okay, thank you. And then this is a view, from West 3rd, and you can start to get a sense of what the overall elevation character is. And then along Frankfurt, here, what we're envisioning is first at the ground level as an opportunity to introduce public art as part of the project, because the vacated Frankfurt is open pedestrian connection, right through the center of the Sherwin-Williams campus, because Sherwin-Williams understands the importance of what that connection is. And then just a couple elevations, you can start to get a sense of what the scale is and the proportional relationship in the facade. This is elevation, the west elevation and the north elevation of the garage. And I'd like to go through this very quickly and then ask Tim to comment specifically on these two facades. What is in the submission, there is not a facade that was included as part of the submission. And this is a view from St. Clair and West 6th of what the existing condition is. If we build the garage as envisioned here, there is some covering of that facade from visually from the trees. Why do we not have that facade? The reason is the future development that Tim talked about that would happen around the garage. And what this dotted line represents is, with that future development, what the relationship would be to that garage. Now, having said that, there's been further thinking about this, specifically on the part of Sherwin-Williams.
Yeah. So what we really wanted to do is we wanted to pull most of our investment to the West 3rd and the Frankfurt side. We understand that, as the retail and residential develop around there, it should act as its own, in essence, facade. Until that happens, we understand there's concerns. I think the canopy helps, the tree canopy helps. I think what our thinking is that if by the time we're ready to take occupancy, if this has not materialized, this development around here, and there wasn't plans for what was going to happen, we would be willing to come back in and have discussions with the planning commission to say, what would be an appropriate facade to go around those other two sides.
Thanks, Tim. And then the material palette. This is There are a few things that we're just getting into now. Material palette is one of them. Exterior lighting I mentioned. But you can start to see here the type of materials that we're looking at. Stone at the base of the pavilion and the podium. And then a range of materials throughout. I won't go through all of this. But in particular, as I pointed out earlier, very transparent glass at the ground plane. And just speaking of the glass, I wanted to include this to talk about the flatness of the glass. We're specifying a glass that is 50% thicker than what you would normally see in an insulated unit. This is a mock-up for one of our other projects, and this is what you see here to the left is what's referred to as a 1/4 inch outer light. And what you're seeing here is a 3/8 inch outer light. And what you can see here is more distortion with that thinner glass. And by increasing the thickness, you get greater clarity in the reflections in the glass itself. You don't get that waviness. And with that, Jarek, a minute.
We probably have 1 minute, so we'll go quickly. If we can go to the next slide, Bill. We'll just talk about some of the things that we have considered, hearing some of your comments, and then when we went to the committees. So we have looked at some improvements and enhancements in the west and north block, so adding some additional trees. Some of these kind of lighter trees here show the existing. So we've met with the city arborist. We did a walk with our local partners, Daru, and with Osborne, helping us understand how to preserve and then enhance here. The same is happening kind of along this west and south block. And then really kind of key things, and Bill talked a little bit about this, really preserving the walkability along Frankfurt and enhancing that. So with street trees where we can include those. And then right now, as we look at Superior, it's a little bleak right now. And so we've got a double row of trees, I think, that line this corridor that I think help with walkability. So pedestrians, how people arrive. We've got a little bit of an open space in here so it can support the programming that Sherwin-Williams has for their employees, their clients, their friends, as well as potential activities where they open up to the community. And so we're excited to see a lot of these spaces. We think some of these gardens could be developed into color gardens. So with the great 4 seasons that we get, we'll develop these, and when we come back for further approvals, we'll look at some of those details and some of the materiality for those spaces. But then lots of clear sight lines for accessibility around the site and between the 2 blocks. So we show kind of our existing conditions, what we had shared last time, and then from the comments, and then working with, you know, our growing group of consultants and local experts to kind of where we see things today. So with that, I'll turn it back to Tim.
Great. I think we've addressed or covered just about everything except for the traffic study that was the multimodal and traffic study, pedestrian study. That is underway with Nelson Nygaard. We've been working with the city and with RTA with that. The one thing that we have been able to determine through the heat map and through the work that we've done with Tom and his team is that it appears that we have about 90% of our people coming from the south. And so from that, we do believe that our entrances and exits are in the appropriate, the best suited for where our people are coming from. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Just some housekeeping at this time. We're going to go into our committee deliberation, which will last about 45 minutes. We're going to take a brief 3-minute recess to make that transition. You'll hear from the committees. And then subsequent to that, we'll transition to our commissions, and the commissions will deliberate with you as we did before. So we're going to take a short 3-minute recess just to get ourselves organized, and we will begin our committee deliberations. Thank you. study and provide renderings of public realm integration at street level. The applicant to enhance the temporary or interim lots on Frankfurt with increased landscaping. And also the design of the sky bridge is treated as a primary architectural element. So those were the items that were highlighted.
Those were the conditions. We gave a conceptual approval last time.
That is correct.
For the pavilion and the tower, and we're asked to give schematic approval today for all three. Do we need to give conceptual approval to the garage first, or can we just deal with it as schematic since the level of information is here?
We can deal with it as schematic.
Okay, and it's my intention to treat each of these three items separately as we put motions together later on. So I want to ask a couple of questions myself before I open this up to the panel. And the first question is, you have met with the city arborist. Has the arborist blessed the material selection, both in terms of hardscape and the tree material and everything that has been presented today? Are they in agreement with what it is that has been proposed here?
The meeting with the arborist was a tree walk to look at the existing trees. We did inquire about preferences from her perspective, and she's looking into which species of street trees are most successful in the city right now. She did point out some existing street trees that she didn't care for the variety of, but we're waiting for her recommendations now.
So we're not going to deal with that on a schematic level is basically what you're telling us.
The locations and the planting of the trees is schematic, but the material itself will be a final design.
Very good. And relative to the traffic study that was done, you've met with the city engineer. Has the city engineer blessed both the traffic flows and, as well as the ingress and egress, the change of direction of the streets, and all of the things that are being proposed relative to this plan?
So at this point, we have a scope that we've presented to them, which they have approved to be done, but we've just begun work on that scope.
So we don't know whether they agree that changing the direction of Frankfurt is acceptable, and we don't know whether they agree that the number of cars that are coming in and out of this garage are acceptable to be coming in the locations that you have indicated.
The number of cars in the direction is an early finding from the study that we have, as was mentioned before, but that has not been presented to city engineers yet.
But have you?
I'm sorry, Jack, that Frankfurt Avenue has been vacated, so it is no longer officially a city street. So the ingress from West 6th Street is irrelative to how Frankfurt works right now.
I understand that. I'm more concerned that Nelson Nygaard has done a traffic study that looks at the traffic patterns all around and how this intervention has the potential to disrupt that, and is it going to cause any of the intersections that we have now to be in worse condition than they are when you are done?
Our initial findings are no, that it won't cause them to be a worse condition than they are today.
Okay,
but
very
we have
good.
just begun.
All right, do we know if any of those are in failure now?
I believe they're at C and would remain at C.
Very good. Okay. Thank you. Let us start, as you started, by talking about the pavilion as a group. And I would open up the panel to ask questions and respond to what it is that they've seen today in terms of the presentation. We'll note that last time we pressed relative to the height of the podium and the access to the roof. I think these things have been addressed here today. The issue of a potential green roof. I guess I'd like to hear more about, you say decorative ballasted roof, but not a green roof?
A decorative ballasted roof could consist of a green roof. We are researching.
Or portions of a green roof?
Or portions of, yeah. So we are starting that evaluation of what decorative ballast means, what the actual materials are, the viability of those materials in our climate, and what the ultimate design might be.
I open this up to the panel to ask questions and comment on the pavilion portion of this project, the pavilion block and the building. Yes. Alan?
Yep, so in terms of the pavilion, I think I'm probably not the only committee member here that has a sense of deja vu. I think that we gave a lot of great feedback. And I don't think that we need to have a discussion about the importance of public square. You guys highlighted in your last presentation and how important it is to accentuate public square in that moment where your nice new headquarters is going to meet public square. A two-story building set back considerably from the street front of public square is pretty much going to ensure that the urban form, the envelope around public square is never going to get filled in our lifetimes. A two-story building, it's not going to cut it. Furthermore, in your presentation, there was this reference to a pedestrian datum, which as a scholar, I've never heard of that term and looked it up, and it does not exist. It seems to me that if a pedestrian datum did exist, it's going to exist on the sidewalk. That's the pedestrian level. That's the datum of where the pedestrians are. And the fact that you think it's 40 feet above the ground might explain why you believe there is a need for a skyway. So I think that looking at it, there was a datum line on Tower City, which is about 56 feet. And I think knowing that this is never going to be 8 stories or as tall as the pedestal where the Huntington Tower is, maybe another story added, which would make it approximately 56 feet to match the datum line from Tower City might be a bit more appropriate and fill in the space, accentuate public square the way that we all sort of really intended it to.
Yeah, so, I think that it was, I'll take responsibility for it. I think in the July presentation, I referred to the pavilion as 2-story, which it is. However, these are 20-foot floor-to-floor heights. It's actually the height of the pavilion is 45 feet, which is, if you compare it to the tower, the equivalent of 3 floors of the tower. And so we did, based on the meeting that we had in July, we did look at a 3-story podium or pavilion. We looked at it two viewpoints. The first was functionally, and just from a planning standpoint, how would that work? And we, and Matt and his team at VOCON analyzed that, and they can speak to the planning implications of that. Because we can, in looking at the 3-story solution, we could reduce the footprint and make it taller and keep the same program, but the program would function very differently in 3 levels versus 2 levels. The other thing we do is shift program from the tower over to the pavilion. And if we want to address that, it certainly can. From a massing standpoint, we feel that a 45-foot tall pavilion is appropriate. And I think I take your point about the labeling of a pedestrian datum. But the fact is that there are 2 datums around public square. And I think be prudent to rename it, the pedestrian datum, something else. But it is locking into, again, not an exact dimension, but a height relationship there, and along with the taller datum.
Does anyone else on the panel want to weigh in on this subject? I have a question. Krista.
Thank you. So I don't want to belabor the point, but I'm going to respectfully disagree with your arrival your determination of that, just because in your diagrams, you do say, you show the two heights, but that lower pedestrian level one, as you're calling it, is never the full building itself. That is merely a change in materiality. It's an articulation of the facade, but the full height of that portion of a building or the building itself is always at that orange line that you had in your diagrams. So I think, seconding kind of some of what Mr. O'Connell had said, is that, I also agree that I think that should be higher, and if that means shifting some of the programming from the tower to make it work, I think that could be appropriate.
I think that I think we can have a robust discussion about this. I think that's absolutely appropriate. I think that there is a perspective I'd like to bring into this discussion, and that it's from Jarek, landscape architect, as it relates to scale. And scale at the ground plane level, and to Mr. O'Connell's point, the relationship to public square. Jerry?
I mean, I think one of the things that we had looked at in terms of height and scale and walkability was getting all of these streetscapes right along this and pulling this back as we looked at the massing and all of the proportions seemed to make a lot of sense in terms of, completing the circle and finishing the 2 blocks out. So.
Mr. Brown, and then Mr. Long. Keith?
I mean, another perspective when I was observing the last meeting was you alluded to the continuation of public square, and when Tommy Leblanski was talking about the greenway coming back up, I was convinced in the beginning that there needed to be a full circle around public square along the historic perspective. But you convinced me at the last meeting that maybe that isn't the direction to go, and you convinced me that the massing is appropriate in the other location. So I kind of took the opposite approach. I mean, public square isn't exactly symmetrical. Can we extend it? Can you ramp it up? Can you make it green? Can you make it feel part of public square? Can you make our public space feel bigger? And so I don't see either direction exactly with what is presented. It's sort of in between. It'd be kind of, it's not pulling public square further, and it's also not historically looking at the perspective of where public square was. So I'm just hoping you could detail a little bit more on how, if you looked at ramping or green space and greening it up and mixing it back into the greenness of the original public square.
Let me defer to Jarek on that.
Dennis? Oh.
Can you put green light on?
Oh, can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay. So when I look at the footprint of the pavilion, there's a north and south, and then there's a non-occupied roof. Wouldn't it make sense to have that be a roof that would be all glass to bring light into it? And also, when you're looking at it from on high, you would see that beautiful section of the pavilion day and night.
Well, I think that question is really a program question relative to the functionality. So, Matt, do you like to speak?
If I understand the question, are you speaking? I have a mic. Sorry. Are you speaking specifically
of the walk,
the roof of the gallery space, or?
Yes, exactly.
I think from a material perspective, that part of the building is the entry court. There will be a lot of movement throughout that space. I know, as we spoke in our last meeting, it is the vision of Sherwin to showcase their products. I know that this is not the meeting that we talk about final materiality, but the thought is that that entry portal is clad with Sherwin-Williams coated product, specifically metal panel, and as a way to showcase their products as well. So glass on the roof in that location, programmatically below it, I don't know the benefits, the program elements that are happening beneath it.
Thank you. Mark Benton.
I guess toward Dennis's point, what if that center portion were lifted up so it was kind of glazed around the perimeter, which would speak to Alan's point about the height issue and also give it some more prominence?
You're suggesting clear story?
Yes.
I think that from architecturally, it's something that could absolutely work. Again, I think we'd have to look at it carefully in terms of what it means relative to the interior space that Matt was talking about. But I think if it was increased, I wouldn't necessarily increase it dramatically. Obviously it needs to be in proportion to the rest of the pavilion.
Thank you, Mark. We're going to go to Greg Soltis and then Mr. Yablonsky.
I was hoping that the picture could come back up of the,
Sorry. Oops.
so I would say that the further we move back from the square, so if I'm standing next to a 46-foot building and it's right on the sidewalk line, it's going to feel very tall, right? Because, we see about 30 degrees up, 30 degrees down. So it's going to feel tall, but the further back it goes from the square, the taller the building needs to be to create that sense of enclosure. And I think the Huntington Bank building across the square illustrates that point, in that they recognize that even though they set the tower back from the square, they needed something to anchor the street wall, and so
Greg,
it steps up.
I'm going to interject for a second because it seems clear to me that this plan is not to contain public square. And to create this plan is not to create a street wall and to contain public square, which I think is where this committee is going. This plan is to extend public square and to put a garden building.
No, I agree. I'm just saying that even so, the space needs to be defined, and the further away you get from public square, because public square is a very big space, that the higher the building potentially should be. It doesn't have to be 20 stories, but it should be higher potentially than what it is. And additionally, the focal point is not super clear in that image. It's a very flat roof that goes all the way across. There's no variation in height. And you have this, these shards kind of that come up from the tower. And there's nothing on this that relates it to the tower with respect to the shapes. Potentially, where the entrance is could be taller. There could be more variation, something that's more visually interesting that helps, again, with, that defining of the space and saying this is something special. It's set back from the square because it's special. So.
Thank you. Mr. Yablonsky.
Yeah, just real quick, because I see the reference to what is the BP building, that in Huntington or Terminal Tower. Their points of entry were for very different reasons. The original Terminal Tower was the entry to a train station, a very big train station. The entry to what became BP originally built was a shopping mall, actually, a 4-level shopping mall. And the reason they were forced to do that because of all the retail they were taking away. They knocked 7 retail buildings down. This is a very different discussion. So I want to go back to something I brought up the last time, is the idea of access and public access, which I guess you said you can't do it, but I'm looking at the program and you have a barista there in the building on the square. At least I think you do. So I don't fully know why that couldn't have a component of getting people a little bit up in a public space to experience the square from a different eye level. Because that's why I asked the question the last time, and it really wasn't explained to me why that couldn't happen this time. That was in the working notes from the last meeting, and it didn't get addressed, as far as I can tell.
I think Tim is the one who needs to address that for us.
Yeah, so when we looked at this and looked at what we're trying to accomplish from a program standpoint, we've got our Learning and Development Center in here, and this is going to be a focal point in the front door for where our people come in. When we looked at it from a security, a safety, a risk management standpoint, fire code, it didn't make sense for us to make rooftop access, even for ourselves. That was something that we decided that there was just too many issues associated with it. You'd have to put in a separate elevator that would go straight up to the roof, because we've got learning and development classes going on that second level. And it was just something that we didn't feel was necessary from our standpoint as far as a program. As far as this pavilion building, though, this will be the spot where if we engage community, if we have a downtown Cleveland Alliance meeting or host a BOMA meeting, it would be in this pavilion, and people would have the ability to access the terraces and things, but we just can't do that during regular business hours when our learning and development functions are going on.
Thank you, Tim. The last comment is going to be Mr. Parker, because we've 20 minutes into this and we got to move on to other pieces. So I'll recognize you, but you're going to have to go fast, Tom.
Okay.
So
Very quick comment. All right. I'll be quick. So a couple supporting comments. So the notion of maybe exploring raising the centerpiece, I think that's a great idea. I'd like to reinforce the notion that you pursue green roofs as part of your roof strategy. The other, it's a detail only because it's been presented here in these documents. On the pavilion, on the east side facing Public Square, you have the large roof overhangs, and on north and south they're non-existent. Could you explain the rationale a little bit quickly about that, why you didn't extend them?
Why there's not more of a roof overhang on the north and south?
Correct.
And just so I understand where you're coming from, Mr. Parker, is that from an architectural point of view?
Solar
from a
orientation.
Solar orientation.
Architectural. You made a pretty significant and nice statement on the east side.
Mm-hmm.
But on the north, again, the Franklin Court axis, but it's non-existent, at least on the upper level. There's a little bit of a hint at the second floor line. So I'm just curious your logic of why you didn't.
Can you
pursue
show
that.
it to us?
Yeah, I think it's on page 18 in the submission. Was a better rendering, but.
There you go.
There we go. So the terraces off the second level of the pavilion building are programmatic. The way learning and development functions on the northern part of that block, the main training rooms, they're large, and there's 4 of them that are buried in the inside of the building. The eastern edge of the building is pre-function area, so that's where you'd be breaking out into, and it would be natural to have the terrace level off of that pre-function area overlooking Public Square. The same thing happens with learning and development on the south part of the block. The learning and development is centered on the inside of the building, and then pre-function happens along the east wall, with terraces then happening on the east wall as well. Loading a terrace on the north wall or a terrace on the south wall would really be inaccessible. There's back of house area, there's furniture storage, there's things that have to happen programmatically. So extending the terraces to the south and to the north just programmatically didn't make sense.
Okay. So without the terraces, but the roof?
Excuse me,
Just extending the roof out. You could, I think there would be an argument for that, a stronger argument to the south from a solar orientation standpoint. There is we're working within fairly tight constraints on the north side of the building and the relationship to Frankfurt, the width of Frankfurt. So it's, a little bit more challenging on the north. But I think point taken on the south, yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Zarfos.
Just a quick observation. When I first saw this, I was a little surprised because the image that comes to mind for me is that iconic image of Central Park with a fisheye lens of that wall around it. And I looked at this and thought, there's a missing tooth in our wall. So that's just, I could go either way, but that's the image that comes to my mind, that powerful image of Central Park.
I want to move us on past the discussion of this block. We'll come back to it when we're going to craft some motions, if they are able to pass. Let's go on. I think that the garage is probably these are the two most hot topics, so let's talk about the garage block. and I'll make some comments about that myself. Again, I appreciate the work that you've done relative to this. Your ground floor height is 11'4", and you're telling us that there's going to be retail in that space with a 9'6" ceiling. I don't think that you will be able to achieve a 9'6" ceiling. I think the maximum you would achieve is 9 feet, and my guess is it will be lower than that. It's not enough of a sandwich for your structure and for whatever ductwork, sprinklers, light fixtures that you need. It's not adequate to, if you expect to have more than an 8-foot-high ceiling, and I respectfully think that is inappropriate on that street. And I'd really like to see you lift the height of that first floor enough to get adequate, a minimum of a foot. I would also like you to build this garage in such a way that you can add a floor to it. That will cost you a few bucks now, but not very much, to increase the size of your foundations and your column loads. I think that in future, when you come back to build additional density on this site, that is going to be the least expensive, most efficient, effective way for you to add parking to this site. And I understand it's easier to expand horizontally than vertically, but I think that putting a garage on the west side of your existing tower and the amount of land that is going to take up to get up into it, to create a ramp, to do all of the things that you have to do, I think will create a problem for you. And I'd like you to have the flexibility in the future to keep all of that parking in a sink in one place where it's surrounded by other program and people are not looking at it, so that we aren't coming back in future years and having the discussion about how you're going to treat the facade for that garage that's going to have to be mechanically ventilated, et cetera, in that other location. I also think that the notion of temporary in this town can mean a generation or 2 generations. And I understand that you are planning to have, and I applaud, the development that will take place to the north and to the west of this parking garage. But those people are going to be looking at this garage too. And I think that there are inexpensive solutions that are creative. You could put a mesh scrim on this garage, as we did at Crocker Park, as you've seen other places, that could be a fantastic Sherwin-Williams, palette of paint or whatever in the temporary time that before a building is going to get built there, and after, when there are people in those buildings looking back at this garage. It's not just the public purview from the street, but it's also the public purview from those buildings which are not going to be a part of your development. So I'd like to see you do that as well. Those are my comments on the garage portion. If you want to respond to any of that before other people answer, be my guest.
Yeah. Thank you for the comment. I'd just like to, the point you raised about increasing the ground floor height, minimum of a foot, and the foundation capacity. I'd like to just address the question about the elevations on West 6th Street and St. Clair. Starting with Sherwin-Williams, there is, first, Sherwin-Williams would obviously love to have that development there. Sherwin-Williams is not interested in having a facade which is no facade, in effect, after this project is complete. And so where they're at on this issue is they're as interested as anybody else to get this development to happen, but if the development doesn't happen within a set time frame, then Sherwin-Williams is in a position to say, okay, let's, as Tim said, let's sit down and figure out what's the most appropriate treatment of those two facades. But this is, I think we would all agree, this is not a long-term solution, and to the point of temporary, I think I think, Mr. Zarfos, you said in the last meeting that temporary is a long time, and you referred to that as well. Mr. Bialowski and Sherwin-Williams understands that as well. So I think that there is common ground on this point.
Very good. Other comments from the panel on this? We have not much time to get to the tower. Greg.
For the elevation where it's facing east or west third, there's, you can see like the stair tower, and it just, it seems like it could be a better, like either hide the stair tower and make it feel more like the human scaled sort of facade extends, and then it's kind of above the, like where the shops are going to be, it's just kind of glass, and it doesn't, I just think it could be articulated better, and maybe anything we can do to make it feel less suburban and to push the stair tower and hide the skywalk would be welcome.
The stair tower is the one place where you might actually see some human activity in this building, and the fact that it could be illuminated differently than the rest of the garage, I think it's also a safety issue, a security issue, that those pieces of vertical transportation be transparent so that they're safe for people.
Right, so that's the other option, either hide it or accentuate it and make it into something, but right now it's kind of in like purgatory.
Anyone else want to weigh in on the garage before we move to the tower? Mr. Parker.
A couple of quick comments. All right, so thank you for looking at the south facade, the Frankfurt facade, and suggesting some public art. I hope that's a robust process and actually involves the public in looking at who the artists are. Have you looked at what the floor surfaces will be, and are we at that point yet, or is that the next meeting?
I didn't quite hear the question.
Are you looking, or have you looked at what the floor surfaces, the ground surfaces, materials? And
We're just starting to look into that.
Okay, so that'll be the next meeting? All right,
Yes.
fine. Thank you.
I think there's no one. Mr. Zarfos.
The site plan or the model shows the parking that surrounds that with very little setback. Is that because you're considering that temporary parking, or I mean, looks like it's almost up to the right-of-way line in the model.
Matt, could you put the plan up, and we'll see where Tom is talking about?
I think I commented the last time that we really need to rethink these edges of parking lots. There's a lot of lineal foot of parking around this thing, and if we're going to use the minimum city standards, that's not good enough. Are you treating that as though it's a temporary lot?
Yes. Are you talking about both on that west and north block and the west and south?
Yeah.
So you're looking at these locations here?
Well, all up by the parking garage in particular.
Or in this location right here?
Up there. In your model here, it shows virtually nothing. So that diagram's a little different. But what I'm suggesting is the city has this minimal setback and a faux wrought iron fence and a couple of shrubs they've used for years in the warehouse district. That's not going to wear well in this project. I mean, it's got to be something better. So that's all I'm saying.
I think what we've tried to do is we've tried to balance so that we can get the 2 bays of parking in there.
Yeah, I know what you're trying.
We've pulled out some of this parking to get some additional trees in here, and then based on visiting with the arborist, they're asking us if we'll keep all of these existing trees in the current location.
I hear you. You're not. What you're doing though is you're not really changing that edge very much, and I've spent a lot of time walking by those, and it's not very nice.
I regret that we have 5 minutes left in which to craft 3 motions if we're going to
I'm
do
done.
that. I think the first one, let's do these in, we haven't even talked about the tower really. Does anyone want to make comments on the tower itself?
I'll make a quick one. I think all the commentary I've heard on it really kind of devils in the details. To me, what will make this interesting and unique to Sherwin-Williams is especially whatever lighting plan you come up with and shadows and things like that, or accentuate who you are. So to me, I guess that's the next meeting, but to me, that's how we're going to know how this tower looks and feels in the downtown skyline and from further away. And I guess it's, those issues, correct me, lighting is not part of this at all yet.
No, it's not.
Okay, thank you.
But I agree with your statement. The devil's in the details. On the exterior lighting, the facade, that's why I wanted to note the glass and the flatness of the glass. To your point, that's what, there's a range of focus over the next few months. Those two issues are really at the top.
This is a schematic design approval still, so there will be plenty of time to talk about that. Mr. Benton?
The one issue that I'd like to raise, can you go to slide number 40? I think it's 40 in your presentation. That one, yeah. You spoke eloquently about the slots that you've created in the building, and I think this one shows my concern with what you're proposing. If you look at the horizontal slot with the shadow line there, if you go to the next slide, you guys have columns there now, and I understand the structural issues of that. I'm just raising the aesthetic issues that the slots you've created vertically are a very strong element. I think they get compromised with the columns. And I understand it would take some study to get rid of them. I would just ask if you've done that, or if you haven't, if you'd consider it.
It's, as you said, I mean, there are significant structural implications with that. We have not looked at that. I understand exactly what you're saying, and I think it's a fair point. It's sort of balancing the aesthetics with the economies of structure, and I think that there are two legitimate points of view on it. I mean, with and without the columns, just visually, and setting aside structural issues, and I think from my standpoint. Actually having that continuation, all the way down to the ground is actually something that we feel very good about. But it doesn't mean it's the only point of view.
It just seems to work at cross purposes with the articulation of that slot.
And I think even though this is not about exterior lighting, as we've started to study this, I mentioned that, the slot here, we're also looking at this in terms of exterior lighting, the tower crown. It all has to work compositionally as one.
For me, it's one of the few places where there actually is articulation in this facade. And if I understand correctly, you're going for a fairly smooth, flat facade. And I know that you guys know an incredible amount about how to work with glass. I've seen that and experienced that. For me, those columns, which are providing additional shadow and articulation in contrast to the flatness of this facade and creating that sort of waste for the building, feels entirely appropriate to me.
I agree.
I'm sorry that we do not have more time to talk about all of these matters. They're all incredibly important. I want to entertain three separate motions. Let's start with what I think is going to be the most straightforward one, which is the last thing that we talked about, which is the tower. Was anyone prepared to make a motion to approve the schematic design of this tower, understanding that there's a lot more work that has to be done, a lot more refinement?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Are there any conditions?
No, because the details I want to see are.
Is
the
there a
next
second?
presentation.
Second.
We have a second from Dennis Long. Are there any further questions or comments or things that want to be added to this?
Can I ask that they study the materiality, since we've kind of introduced that at this stage with the glass, that if there's a possibility to incorporate some sort of masonry or something around the base type area, something that pulls from the context a little bit. I'm not asking them to make it look old or dated or anything. There are ways to use masonry in a contemporary way, but I think it needs to anchor it both contextually and just visually.
Are you talking about at the bottom of the building or throughout
Yeah.
the entire, at the bottom of the building? Of course.
To your point, actually the base of the building, and it doesn't show clearly here, but is stone. And it's really tied in and looking at the material palette around Public Square.
Okay.
We have a motion and a second. Please call a roll.
Bialowski.
Yay.
Benton.
Yay.
Brown.
Yay.
Long.
Yay.
O'Connell.
Yay.
Parker.
Yay.
Pisarcik.
Yay.
Solstice. Yablonsky.
Yay.
Zarfas.
Yay.
Zarnas.
I need to abstain. I'm late to the dance here, and if I can do that, I'd like to do that.
That's fine.
Motion passes.
Motion carries with one abstention. Let's move next to the garage. I would like to entertain a motion with conditions, motion of approval, the conditions being the study of increase of 1 foot of height to the first floor of the building, the potential for the project to receive additional floors by strengthening of the foundation and the structure, as well as consideration for a temporary scrim to be approved that can be changed at such time as you have something else. But in order to approve this, something on the north and west face of this facade. Is anybody prepared to make that motion?
Could I add a condition?
You may, Rick.
Thank you. So going back to our last session, so the pedestrian experience, I thinking this is the appropriate motion to do this on Frankfurt, to continue that study. You've started, with the public art, but continue through the textures, the surfaces, and vegetation, please.
That's hardscape.
Hardscape.
Have you just made the motion including all of that stuff?
Sure.
Okay, is there a second to that motion?
I'll second it.
Second from Mr. Yablonsky. Are there any further questions, comments, or conditions?
I too would like to see further development of Frankfurt. I think there's some opportunities there, and we don't have time to talk about it today, but I think it's important.
So may I ask a couple questions on that? So I had a question about your condition about, looking at adding additional floors onto the parking garage. What exactly are you talking about?
I'm talking about strengthening the foundation and adding a little bit of steel to the columns, which is the only thing that you would have to do, which would allow you in future to add future floors to this garage so that you don't have to build another garage somewhere else in order to accommodate your future office that you will build.
To add one additional floor or to add multiple additional floors?
I leave that to you, at least one. I think when you look at it, you might decide that you want to do more than that.
Okay.
And I think the incremental cost of it is not going to be huge. It's something you should be aware of and study.
And then just one other point of clarification, also on the raising it a foot, if we can show that at the current height that it works, either that or raise it a foot to make sure that...
Yes, that would be acceptable.
Okay, thank you.
How deep is that retail? So you might free blow across it, but still. Okay, let's call the question. And call me last.
ready?
Yeah.
Okay. We're going to go from last. Zarnis.
Yay.
Zarfus. Zarfus.
Oh, yeah.
Yablonsky.
Yay.
Solstice. Pisarcik.
Yes.
Parker.
Yay.
O'Connell.
Yes.
Long.
Yay.
Geist. Whoops. Brown.
Yay.
Boyd.
Not here.
Not here. Benton.
Yay.
Bialowski.
Yay. Motion carries. Let's go on to the pavilion. Is anyone prepared to, perhaps Mr. Benton is prepared to make a motion?
I would move to approve with further study on the potential of raising the roof in the center portion and studying roof overhangs on the north and south facades. Were there any other issues?
Just a refinement of what decorative ballasted roof, that it means including portions of a green roof.
Thank you. That too.
So we have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
That came from Mr. Long. Are there any other comments or questions?
I'd just
Please.
like to ask a question.
Go
'cause
ahead,
I got cut off
Krista.
earlier. I was wondering if the applicant would consider further study of this mass's orientation, and if either it gets rotated 90 degrees counterclockwise, or if it gets flipped north to south, over like an east-west axis, just so that maybe, like, so if we're not going to get our height, if we're still going to talk about extending Public Square, I think it makes more sense to have the massing along Superior and to actually open up the pedestrian connection from Public Square to Frankfurt, which is where everybody seems to want that pedestrian connection. I think that would help kind of funnel that, that access.
Make sure we understand what she's talking about. You're talking about, if I understand what you're talking about doing, doesn't that mean that you would be blocking off the center of Public Square from this extension of the garden, Krista?
Yes. We turn our back on Public Square at that point.
No, you would still have that plaza space. I'm just talking like the wider portion of the building that you have along Frankfurt. If that wider mass was on Superior and the narrower part was on Frankfurt, so that
Yes, but the
angle-
wider portion of it extends further east to west.
Because if you look at this diagram, the Public Square, how the pathways funnel towards that corner, and that would actually allow that corner to open up to Frankfurt, where you are going to be focusing some pedestrian connections. And then it puts more of the mass at the southern end of the block at Superior.
Can I make a comment?
Of course.
First, as you might imagine, we went through a range of options on the pavilion orientation. And we did not exactly what you're talking about, but we did have it being more Superior-centric in terms of its orientation in the east-west axis. And as the design evolved, what I think this diagram actually does a good job of looking at these other buildings and how they relate to Public Square. But also it was a question of solar orientation in terms of being able to have, this, we looked at a whole range of options here, what was happening on the Jacobs block, but we wanted to create a situation that this was in sunlight, most of the day. Okay. And so this orientation, we believe, is consistent with, even though there are different reasons and uses that evolved over time, of the relationship to Public Square as represented by these other buildings.
Excuse me, we ran over by about 15 minutes, so we need to put this to a
I'm
closure.
going to call this question. Is there anyone who agrees with Krista on the panel? I do not.
We had discussed it last meeting and asked for it to be studied, and I thought it was going to be something that we discussed today, that we reviewed today.
Well, I don't want to force the issue, so I'm going to ask you to study this again. Is that fair enough or no?
That's,
Jack, don't we already have
Does
conceptual
I just
approval?
want a straw poll. Who agrees with Greg and Krista?
I think it needs to be studied further, yeah. I think a lot of things need to be studied about the pavilion besides the orientation.
Can I just make one comment? I think one.
sorry.
I'm sorry.
One of the things that we were looking at with the plaza, and when you kind of look at the city plan, and when you look around Public Square, you have a number of different angles and vantage points through the city to this space. And I think when we were looking at the orientation of this space, I think there's a couple of things that happened. One that Bill talked about, this puts this kind of public, semi-private space into the most light. We also, in terms of just looking at transportation and arrival, we were really looking at Superior Avenue. It was important to us. And so getting this angle and this movement, and if you kind of look tightly at the diagram, you know, we've cut some kind of clear pathways and walkways through this to make that access to these locations and kind of working this bigger piece that kind of comes around all of this, whether you're coming down any of these streets, and kind of making this movement as we kind of move towards that warehouse district.
All right,
So
I'm going to call the question on this. I think the commissions have heard this conversation in the next room, and we'll leave it to them to decide. We're not making that a condition of approval. Please call the question.
Zarnis.
Yay.
Zarfas.
Yay.
Yablonsky.
Yay.
Solstice.
That was a
Pisarcik.
nay.
No.
And that's a nay.
Okay, Pisarcik.
She was nay.
Okay,
No.
Parker.
Yay.
O'Connell.
No.
Long.
Yay.
Geist.
Not here.
Brown. Bogart.
Not here.
Benton.
yay.
Bialowski.
Yay.
Yeas have it.
The yeas have it, the motion carries. I appreciate everyone's patience. I'm sorry about the amount of time that we've had to discuss this. I think it merits more discussion.
Yes. Thank you all. We're going to transition to our last commission review. So we'll take a 2-minute transition, and we're going to pick up from there. Thank you.
The planning commission, how much time are you allowed to do that? 4:50? About 4:15. That's fine.
expedite this because we have a short period of time here. I'm going to start on the far side with Diane with any questions about the pavilion. Oh, we got to call the roll. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Freddie.
Anderson.
Here.
Bailey. Bailey. She's here. I don't know where she went. Bonizzi.
Here.
Bowen.
Present.
Kalikia. Here. Collier. Here. Downing. Here. Dreyer. Here. Fluker.
Present.
Jones. Curry.
Present.
McCray Scott.
Here.
Slife. Strickland. Tarazic.
Here.
He was here.
We have quorum.
Bailey just walked in. Okay, good.
Bailey.
Here.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we have a quorum. Okay, so we're going to start with the pavilion first. And Diane, we're going to start with you and we'll just work around the table. Any questions for you? Okay, go ahead.
Not at the moment on the pavilion?
Okay.
Not at the moment.
Just keep on coming. Questions?
Related to the pavilion.
Oh, no. About the pavilion?
Yeah.
Correct.
No, I just only had the same question from the last meeting. I like the concept you had, if you could just show the first floor. Plan, yeah, I mean. Can you show the first floor?
I'm sorry, first floor?
Yeah, that's the concept. Yeah, the pavilion, that's where we're going. Just the floor plan part. Because your site plan showing the pedestrian just going around the building and just the
wants a
first,
site plan.
just the floor plan. Oh, you're getting there, okay. Oh, that's fine. Your site plan just showing the pedestrian going around the building, and understand that this is for your employee just going through the lobby area. So I thought maybe, as I mentioned in the first meeting, inviting the pedestrian from public square and just somehow going through the lobby just to go across the street to the tower. That was just my comment from the last meeting, so I just wonder how you felt about that. But it's not a lobby. What I was mentioning from the first meeting is just to let it be open, and it's just be a pass-through, just at the first level. And the lobby can be offset from either side, but it don't be that wide, but it's just be a pass-through just to get to the tower. That was just my comment only. So that's all I had.
Okay, Raymond. Go ahead.
No, nothing at this moment.
Okay, Lily.
I guess it's a comment, but a question about whether you're able to consider or reconsider the barista area being accessible to the public. When I think back to one of the biggest mistakes that was made with the when the convention center and the kind of global center was built, was when the restaurant or the cafe was actually not placed on the mall. It was placed on the other side of the building, and just missed a huge opportunity to activate the mall. And really was a structural error in the plan. And I just worry that programmatically having kind of 2, 3 kind of super blocks with nothing really accessible to the community, is a long-term problem. So, to reconsider just the barista program as also having kind of outdoor porch onto the public square and or to the public thinking about an additional door so that it could operate independently, just would be a really important corner that needs life for me. So it just would seem to me like a pretty enormous missed opportunity for the life that it would bring to that quadrant. That's it.
Thank you. Giancarlo?
I am looking forward to getting more information about the decorative ballasted roof and the possible green roof. And there was some discussion in the prior segment regarding orienting the building so that that larger wall is facing Superior. And since you had said that most of your traffic is coming from the south, I think the orientation that you have is appropriate. So those are basically my comments.
Thank you. August?
No comment at this time.
Alan? Anyone else that we skipped over? Okay, I take a motion. This is for the pavilion. Okay, we have a motion to approve with the comments from design review and planning. Okay. We have a motion?
Second.
We have a motion and second. Further discussion? Freddie, call the roll, please.
Anderson,
Yes.
Bailey,
Yes.
Bonizi,
Yes.
Bowen,
Yes.
Colicchio,
Yes.
Collier, yes. Downing,
Yes.
Dryer,
No.
Fluker,
Yes.
Curry,
Yes.
McCray Scott, Strickland, Tarasik,
Yes.
yeas have it.
Okay, and tower next? Yeah, the tower. Okay, so we're moving on to the tower. Alan, why don't we start on this side and go around this way? August?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I guess my question is, when are we going to comment about the streetscape and landscape architecture? Where does that fall in this cycle?
Well, they didn't take that separately, but why don't we do it? I guess the pavilion would have been better, but let's do it with the tower, so make comments.
Okay, I think it's, I know it's in concept stage, but I think it's vitally important that we understand how materials are used, what the species of plant materials are, what street furniture, I know you won't have public art, but at least locations of public art. I think the Frankfurt Court is an opportunity to create a material change to make it pedestrian friendly when you don't have a lot of vehicular traffic, And I think you could help calm traffic, but you can also create a pleasant experience for pedestrians.
Quick response to that? Mr. Fluker, we are in 100% agreement with you. And the landscape work is only started in the last couple of months. And as we advance this and coming back in November, the questions and the issues that you raised will be addressed.
And one other thing, I know I'm beating a horse on this one, but this administration needs to work with Sherwin-Williams to make sure what they're proposing ties into the mobility study that you're working on so that it's seamless. Because it's our responsibility as a municipality to create an experience that is outside the four walls of this facility, but also encompasses the core values that we're trying to encompass as a 21st century city. Thank you.
Great comment, August. Michelle, go ahead.
I don't have any comments. Thank
Okay.
you.
No comments. Elaine?
No comments.
It's just in regards to the tower.
Yeah, tower.
I just only have one comment from the last meeting. Is your plan still for the Sky Bridge to have all your utilities to go through the tower to your pavilion?
Yes.
That's still the plan?
Yes.
That's all.
I have a question in reference to branding and the label of the building in general. How is that going to occur, and how will anyone know that that is the Sherwin-Williams building?
Besides just a big sign.
Can't hear. Branding. Branding, yeah.
Your branding.
Yes, yes. Go ahead.
Yeah, this will have signage on it. We haven't gotten to that, to where the signage package is, but we will definitely have signage on both sides of the building. It will be recognizable as the Sherwin-Williams building. We want this to be a beacon of success for our company and for the city. But that will come in final design.
Go ahead.
Can I make just one quick comment?
Sure.
To that question. It's a great question.
Yeah.
And I think there's two ways of looking at branding. One is being very literal about it, Sherwin-Williams. Another is what Sherwin-Williams is about, in large part, color, and how that can be integrated into the architecture, into the interiors, into the landscape. So I think it's really twofold.
That's what I wanted to hear.
That was a big
Thank you.
conversation in the back about branding. It didn't look like Sherwin-Williams, you know, when you think of Sherwin-Williams. So go ahead.
I'll keep this brief, but this is to just carry over from the last meeting, which is that I would like to acknowledge that, you know, you guys did take a full effort of all the comments that we said. Being the end of the row, I feel the need to kind of sum this all up. And a lot has been said about what could have been, but ultimately we're here to critique and see the appropriateness of what's in front of us. And that being said, I'm happy with the acknowledgement of all the studies you guys have done, about all the questions that we've asked. And in that sense, I have no further questions about the tower. I think a lot of these things that we still have questions about will get fleshed out in the final design package, where you can kind of get into these like nitty-gritty details. But as a schematic design package, I'm good with the way it stands. So thank you.
Diane? Okay. So anyone else has a question before we look for a motion? Okay, I'll be looking for a motion, and this is for the tower. Okay, we have a motion.
I second.
A motion and a second. Further discussion, anyone? Freddie, call the roll, please.
Anderson,
Yes.
Bailey,
Yes.
Bonizzi,
Yes.
Bowen,
Yes.
Kalikia,
Yes.
Collier, yes. Downing,
Yes.
Dreyer,
Yes.
Fluker,
Yes.
Curry,
Yes.
McCray Scott,
Yes.
Strickland, Tarasic,
Yes.
Ayes have it. Great. Okay, so let's move on to the garage. Diane, we'll start with you first. Go ahead, Jonathan.
I have no comments outside of what design review said about the garage.
Same with me, no comments except for what the design review said about the
Okay.
garage.
Same, I agree with the design review, especially increasing the first floor related to, utilities like mechanical and stuff like that. So I agree with that comment.
I have no further comment other than design review as well.
My comment relates to what August was talking about, especially related to Frankfurt, around the urban design and the materials. I'm still not convinced that people walking from Public Square are going to take Superior. I still think the major walkway people will want to walk is Frankfurt.
That's true.
And now, since the retail doesn't seem to make sense there, or it's not going to be incorporated, I truly do worry, as I said, about this being kind of 3 blocks of having nothing really active for the community on the first floor of any of it. But that being said, I think the streetscape improvement or the streetscape treatment, it being more charming, really thinking about the city maybe really working with what the street materials can be is absolutely important, because Superior is still a harsh way, and it's not the most direct route to the warehouse district. So I just encourage along the garage to push the envelope there. And I think it would help to really think about not such a long walls of murals as you're thinking. Like for me, I think in some ways that can feel like a really blank space if you've got continuous stuff. So I think the challenge I see on all sides of this project on the ground level is how to take non-accessible facade at the ground level and make it interesting and nice to walk by. That's not like blocks and blocks of, just glass. So it's a challenge, but I think it's one that needs to be done.
Can I make a quick comment on that? We agree. And what's shown in the elevations is literally a placeholder. And it's not intended that it would be absolutely the same. And so we're in alignment with your point of view.
I think from my perspective, I think that the texture of stuff going on is more important than, let's say, the public art behind it or that sort of thing. So I'm going to push again. I really think Sherwin-Williams ought to really think about the barista being open to the public and spilling out onto Public Square. I think it could be the biggest gift to the city, which is to really activate that corner. It might be the most important gesture I can see that's left to be made here, which is to really consider that, to turn it outward, to open it up onto Public Square, to think about a door, and to deal with security. I get it. It needs to be secure, but the way you've already designed the lobby, it seems like you can secure behind it. So I really, really hope that you guys will reconsider that. I think it is the most important thing I see today that needs to be addressed for the future of Public Square.
Great.
Go ahead, Fred, you want to say something?
Yeah, I just want to just capitalize on two quick points. And it kind of builds off of what Commissioner Curry alluded to when she referenced textures and surfaces. I think that ground plane is just as important as the horizontal environment, particularly when we talk about Frankfurt. And I know you guys have been in dialogue with the folks who are doing improvements to the 55 building on the ground floor and adding a restaurant. That's a key opportunity there, and the city should and has to be very much involved with the right-of-way enhancements along those stretches of corridor. So I think that's absolutely key, because you can actually change the feel of even your building if you look at the ground plane as being integrated into that whole element along Frankfurt. And then the other thing, you guys know I'm very bullish about this one, is, that facade on St. Clair, as well as West 6 of the garage, is critically important, given the fact that although we know future development will happen there, we believe that 100%. But there isn't in the meantime, and when someone is having a residence there or an office there, they will be looking at those garage facades. So it's just very important to just, double down on making sure that those facades are addressed. And I know you had indicated that Sherwin-Williams would be more than willing to come back and take a look at that. The question that we do have to ask ourselves is, what better time than the present to address something that we know is going to be something that needs to be addressed in the future. So just keep those things in mind as we move forward to the next phase of review. Thanks.
Go ahead, Giancarlo. Questions?
I'm sitting here listening to everyone, and I'm thinking about urban design. And I think I came up with a pretty good example or an analogy. Let's just assume that Public Square is an open office space, and you have cubicles. But you set your pavilion back and you created an opportunity to create sort of breakout spaces. People feel more comfortable when there's smaller, more intimate space. And I think by nature of what you've done as an extension of Public Square, you can capture some pedestrian traffic that would not otherwise feel comfortable in that bigger open space. So I think what happens there is going to be vitally important, how it's detailed, how it feels, how intimate it feels, how engaging it might be, and quite frankly, how visually pleasing. So there's a great opportunity here, in my opinion.
Good comment. Alan?
I just want to emphasize what Ms. Curry and Dr. Calder said, and we look at the further project. I appreciate that you've already made a commitment on the undeveloped facades, but I think we need to sit
Thank you. You know, I think you heard from the commission, both commissions, how important Frankfurt is, how important the green space is. Think about how that could be programmed differently when on weekends or when it's not fully utilized by Sherwin-Williams. It could be closed off, and what kind of function Sherwin-Williams can have for their staff and the residents around them. How the garage could be used, because there's great examples of how garages are used besides parking cars. So we just hope you take a look at those things. And Lillian's comment about the barista and opening that up to the public's wonderful. So please take a look at that. I take a motion.
I'll move approval, incorporating design review comments. Do any of my fellow commission members want to add anything else?
I think they heard our comments, so that's good.
So I move approval with the incorporation of design review comments.
I'll second that.
We have a motion second, further discussion. Ready to call the roll, please.
Excuse me. You know, one thing I wanted to mention about talk about with the conditions. One of the conditions that was brought up during design review was about constructing the garage in a manner that additional floors could be added on to it. That's one of the things that I'm not sure that we're interested in taking a look at. I think there's going to be other opportunities for parking. I just don't see that we're going to be in a spot where we're going to need to add additional floors onto that. And that's really a condition that I don't think that, you know, as the applicant, that we're willing to look into. And I'm not really sure it's quite within the design review's purview to dictate, you know, the constructability of the garage.
Well, it's an honest comment back to us, and I think that's fine. Doesn't mean you're not going to get an approval at the end of the day. So it's their comments. Take a look, what you can see out of it, if there's a benefit to Sherwin-Williams or not. And I think that's fair.
And if I may, we are moving ahead to the future, and our hope is that you may not need the amount of cars that you have there that are being proposed today, and that more people are taking public transit and using alternative modes to get to and from work. That's ultimately the objective.
Might need it for queuing, and that's about it.
Mr. Chair, I might add one thing. Before you guys get on the plane and leave, I suggest you go down to what I believe probably the most successful urban space downtown, in my opinion, is Eastman Garden, between the library. It's always used. People feel comfortable. They're eating lunch. They're reading. It's playful. There's kids, you know, sculptures and you know, you understand. I'm not saying you emulate that. What I'm saying is you create your own aesthetic and your own brand. And I think there's a great opportunity here, so.
Thanks, August.
Yeah.
So we have a motion. We have a motion and a second.
Okay.
Call the roll, please.
Yes. Anderson.
Yes.
Bailey.
Yes.
Bonesi.
Yes.
Bowen.
Yes.
Kalikia. Collier. Yes. Downing.
Yes.
Dreyer. Fluker.
Yes.
Curry.
Yes.
McCray Scott.
Yes.
Tarasic.
Yes.
Okay, yeas have it.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you all for your time, and thank you to the boards and commission who participated. Today, we'll be moving into the final review. Notification of that meeting will be coming out soon, so thank you for your time and look forward to evaluating further to get this project right for the city of Cleveland. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
How you doing?
That was
That's how it should be.